Hello, BookTube. It's a beautiful, mild summer Tuesday. What better time for you to submit yourself to a little gentle Steve probing? So I thought I would ask you all to lay flat on the exam table, trapdoor down, while I ask you a few questions. I was asking these questions, I was brooding them around among my critical friends, the people who don't know that BookTube exists and wouldn't be good at it or try it in a million years if they did. Freelance critics and in-house critics for various organs people that I know who are so to speak in the business of what Gore Vidal referred to as the book chat world. Are you reviewing books? Are you writing about books? Are you columning about books? Are you memoiring about books? That whole world, which is significantly smaller now than it's ever been, and I mean ever, including not just 1824, but also 824. Nobody reads. But there's a tiny, tiny, tiny niche fragment of the world that does read for pleasure. And I was thinking about this subject. I have lots of questions about this subject. I'm always interested in this world. I've been a participant in this world for a long time. I was a participant in this world for a long time. Then I took a break, and then I became a participant again, and have been participating for a long time. I find every aspect of it genuinely fascinating. And the question that's been on my mind recently basically boils down to, how do you decide what you're going to read next? Now, I know that there's a huge segment of that small niche population, including probably a lot of people that I'm talking to right now, that don't decide, that call themselves mood readers and just drift like a jellyfish on the currents. I don't know what I feel like reading now. I'll just drift, and the next thing I brush against, I'll read that. And if I read 5 words of that and then I'm not thrilled to the ultimate heights of orgasm, well, then I'll drop it and I'll drift on to something else. Those people, this question really doesn't apply. But for everybody else, some version of this question applies. How do you decide what you're going to read next? Some of you, I know, are fond of reading programs, of an actual superstructure for your reading. And so it's not just a question of what you're going to read next, it's what type, what genre, what direction. Some of you like those projects quite a bit and engage in them. Recently here on BookTube, a tag went around and also a discussion went around that led me to believe that formally or informally, most of us have projects like that. I always refer to it as your remit, your bailiwick, which is not so much a question of what the next specific book you're going to read is, as what will determine that. What set of factors will determine that? I have one myself, for instance. Really, it's twofold. The main one being the new releases in the American book market in 15 or 16 genres that interest me. With the secondary one being the interesting items that I glean from the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, used books just in general, maybe sent from some of you. Those are the two active factors in my bailiwick. And some of you have the same thing. Some of you are very author specific. I have found an author, the author is prolific. I want to read everything by this author. Some of you are very genre specific. I know there are all sorts of genres out there, and I know from my exposure to BookTube there are lots of active readers that love them, but I just want to read romance novels. Myself, I just want to read romance novels. I have, as most of you do, a very limited reading time. It can't be squandered on just anything. So I'm just going to read romance novels, or I'm just going to read fantasy series, epic fantasy, or whatnot. And that helps you to narrow down the bailiwick of where you're reading, and then that makes the choosing of the next book a little easier. Some of you out there listening to me now are much closer to bookish omnivores. I myself am very close to a bookish omnivore. I'll read almost anything that you put in front of me, at least until it proves itself to be dumb or duplicitous. But otherwise, I'll give almost anything a try. And I think a lot of you are the same way. You're bookish omnivores. So you don't have that superstructure of, well, I've got 6 books in front of me, but only one of them is translated literature from outside my own country. And translated literature from outside my own country is largely what I like to read. So I'm going to ignore the other 5 I'm going to ignore those other choices. That makes narrowing things down very easy, and narrowing things down is very attractive considering the mind-boggling number of alternatives there are out there. I understand that impulse completely. But some of you don't do that. Some of you are omnivores, where I don't have a superstructure like that. Maybe a couple of booktube events are imposing a little superstructure. Maybe you're adding a Western here and there because of June on the Range. Maybe you're reading a Star Trek book because of Book Trek. Things like that, fine. But otherwise, absent those events, some of you are more omnivorous than others. I would think that in almost all cases, except for those jellyfish mood readers, I don't know that they really exist. I really sort of doubt that they do. But let's say that they do. They are a cherished item in booktube mythology, so let's say they exist. Aside from them, pretty much everybody has some sort of structure to what they're reading, even if it's anticipating your own moods. Well, I was reading something light and fluffy the last 3 books, so I don't know what I'm going to read next, but I know it's not going to be that. I'm intentionally going to go for a counteractive to that, or the alternative. I've read a few serious books. I need a palate cleanser. I need something that's set on Barsoom or in the Regency period or whatnot. Even those people, you reach a point where you have to pick another book. You have to pick your next book, or your next 5 books, or your next 10 books. And the question that's been on my mind is, how do you do that? How do you do that? I have been a member in more or less good standing. I've been a junkyard dog in the book chat world for a long, long time. So for a long time, I've been part of a profession whose job is to help shape that decision. Some of my critical brethren over the decades have been more explicit about that than others. I myself straddle both sides of the fence of explicitness because on the one hand, I write for the professional trade journals, whose only job is to help you decide what to read next. That's all they're trying to do. And they're doing it very programmatically. 325 words, here is the plot, here is the assessment. And the assessment has none of me, it has none of the reviewer, it is the institution reviewing the strengths and weaknesses of this book. And then the other half of me is on the other half, the other side of that fence, where it's far more crafted prose reviews. I would say far more personal reviews, where I'm bearing down a lot harder on the book, and the thing that I'm writing is a work of writing on its own. When you're writing for a trade journal, like Library Journal, the end result is unsigned, and that's just as well. I've never met anyone who wrote for the trade journals who wanted to sign their work, because the strictures of the review that you're writing mean that you cannot make it good. You cannot make the review good. You can make it efficient for the reader, and that's all that the reader wants. Those trade journals are used for schools, library budgets, that sort of thing. They cannot be long. They cannot be frilly. You absolutely cannot be burying your point under euphemisms, like happens in a lot of mainstream book reviews. You have to get straight to the point. And there are plenty of writers who do that kind of work who don't so much mind that it's not signed, because it's not anything that would reflect on their career. It's not anything that shows any artistry. Whereas on the other side of that fence, if you're a reviewer, you do show artistry. I would hope that you would domesticate your artistry so that it is in service to analyzing the book. You're still only serving one master, and that is the reader, or potential reader. I would hope that you would tone it down enough so that your reader does know what you're trying to say about the book, even though they'll enjoy that review a lot more than they will a publisher's weekly review. Usually, that's the case. We can leave aside the trade journals for the minute here and just talk about the other side of that fence of book reviewing itself, actual mainstream book reviewing. I've been in that world for a long time, and one of the guiding illusions of that world, I don't think it's real, is that is one of the purposes that it serves, is to help people decide what they're going to read next. As few people as read for pleasure, I think far fewer of them. One in 500 million people on Earth reads for pleasure. If 1 in a million people reads for pleasure in the world, maybe fewer than that. And of those 1 in a million people, I would say probably 1 in a million of those 1 in a million people read book reviews to help them determine what they're going to read next. The industry still flourishes, thankfully, since I've got dog food to pay for, but I don't think anybody much uses it for that purpose. Instead, they tend to go elsewhere. They go to YouTube, for instance, or Amazon, or Goodreads. There's still book reviews, but there are far more product reviews than book reviews there. There's very little artistry involved in most Goodreads or Amazon reviews of a book. They're hitting the points that they think will convince you or not, and that you'll think are important. Or, for instance, they go to celebrity book clubs, or book clubs just in general. You might have a local book club in your town that picks the book, and you just read what they pick until it's time for you to pick. Some people in ages past, long before the internet, used to go to the library. The libraries would often produce reading lists, sometimes quite elaborate reading lists. Small local libraries would have avid readers on the staff, and they would decide to come up with long reading lists. If you like this, you'll like this. Under this particular genre heading, here's a list of things with brief descriptions. I wish I'd saved all of those lists that I've encountered over the many, many decades. I wish I'd saved them, some of them, because they were gems, and they're all gone. Of course, those library staffs have all turned over. A lot of those libraries have closed. A lot of that precious ephemera of library know-how is gone. And there are also Oprah. There's Oprah. There's Reese Witherspoon, who just had a long and loving profile in the latest New York Times book review, which was kind of ironic, and it's kind of what put the thought in my mind, because that profile of Reese Witherspoon was right in the middle of the New York Times book review, which likes to think of itself as the most trusted mainstream book chat venue anywhere in the English-speaking world. And yet, right in the heart of it was Reese Witherspoon, who I imagine is far more trusted than the New York Times book review, because whether or not she recommends a book requires only a glance at a label on a book. It doesn't require you to read 2,000 words of Dwight Garner. It doesn't require you to read anything. In that profile, the fawning profile said that people trust Reese Witherspoon. I don't know how that could be true. They don't know her except as an actress. They don't know that she reads at all. They certainly don't know her as a reader. I think what the people who said that to the profile writer probably meant is that they trust her book club picks because the book club picks that they've read have been good. How you could feel that way after the Reese's book club pick foisted When the Crawdads Sing on America, I don't know. But people loved it. Millions of people did. So people go there. They go to celebrities. Some people go to celebrities online, on YouTube or on BookTube. Even people who are dramatically unqualified. You'll get some fascist 20-year-old who's got the full beard and the American World War II era rifle as a decoration on his set, and is literally talking about sending Democrats to concentration camps, saying it with a smile on his boyish face, saying that gay people should be electrocuted, that anyone who thinks different from him should be sent to a concentration camp, and maybe some of them should be killed, saying openly on his YouTube channel that women shouldn't have any civil rights at all. No voting, no property, no nothing. And in the comments section, his worshipful followers, among many other things, saying, yeah, we're with you when you're undisputed Führer of this country, we will be behind you 100%. And him just saying, okay, great. No response at all to comments like that saying, I am not calling for a dictatorship. I am not calling for the execution of anyone. I am not going to be a dictator. Nothing like that, because he is. He wants to be one. But mixed in with those comments for this little monster, and there are plenty of monsters like him, are people asking for a reading list, for reading recommendations. They're that desperate for reading recommendations. Andrew Tate has received multiple requests for reading recommendations. A guy who made a video openly mocking the very idea of reading, and so on down the line. Joe Rogan has millions of requests for reading recommendations. Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, of course, people that. They don't read. They don't read for pleasure. They want to ban and burn books. That's how desperate a lot of people are for reading recommendations. And that, plus the Reese Witherspoon fawning profile, got me thinking about where you get any nudges that you use to nudge you towards your next book. I want to know about that. I want to know what the process is by which you pick your next book. Now, some of you are going to frustrate me and flatter me at the same time by saying that your answer is simple. You use this corner BookTube. that you have a handful, maybe a dozen booktube channels that you watch, people that I know, a lot of people who've been here at Hyde Cottage for Wine and Calzones, and you just take their recommendations. You're not interested in new releases, so you just take their recommendations on what they've encountered recently that looks good. A lot of you will probably say that you get a lot of recommendations from Criminale or Michael K. Vaughan or even me. But what else? Where else do you go for your book recommendations? Do any of you go to written book reviews? I'd love it if you all said mine, but I'm not that much of an egotist. I don't have any illusions that you're going to say that you use my recommendations of books, although I've written tens of thousands of book reviews. If you look on my name online, you'll find more published book reviews than for anybody else. Maybe not the highest number of books, because I have a friend who writes a column where he covers 3 books a week and has for 15 years, so that's a lot of books. But what about that? What about the book world section of the Washington Post, or the new fiction lineup, the fiction column for the Wall Street Journal, or even the much maligned by me anyway, New York Times Book Review? Do you use written reviews to help you decide on a book at all? I imagine most of you are not in the professional world, so you don't have access to Publishers Weekly or Library Journal. Those can be fairly expensive subscriptions. So, but there are plenty of book reviews out there. Do you do that? What about, I don't know, bookish communities on Facebook or on Twitter or Instagram or even Book Talk? I know Book Talk has a reputation for being imbecilic, but I imagine there's all sorts of real people on there. I've never actually gone on Book Talk to see. But where do you go? I'm not saying that you go anywhere. You might not go to any source. You might be your own source. You might go to your own bookshelves, and that's it. But the bookshelves had to come from somewhere. The bookshelves were generated by you buying books at some used bookstore or library sale somewhere. That had to be, something had to guide your hand then. Oh. Oh, goodness. They don't go to you, baby, because you don't know how to read. There she goes, over to her chair. I'll wrap this up anyway. That's just a sign that I've gone on too long. You know now my questions for this probing, this gentle probing by Steve. I want to know how you decide what you're going to read next. How do you do that? And if you use outside sources, if you're not a current-driven mood reader, and if you're not internally motivated by what's on your shelf, what you feel like, then if you're at all motivated by recommendations or outside sources, what are they? Where do you go for book recommendations? And do you use them? How do you determine what you're going to read next? I think that question is perennially fascinating. Okay, I'm a little bit distracted. There's no way for me to make a video longer than 5 minutes without a pause. There's no way for me to do that. This is a drag strip and a war zone. So, but none of you seem to mind. None of you seem to comment on it. So I'll just let it go. Okay, let me get back on track. All right. That's my question for this Steve probe is, how do you decide what you're going to read next? That's the broader question. And then the more specific question is, if you are aided, if you go to aids for your deciding what you're going to read next based on anything, what are those anythings? I want to know all about it. Tell me everything. I was a little bit frustrated emailing back and forth with a few critics, getting, tired carping answers that are the same as they were in 1990. And then it suddenly dawned on me, I remembered, as I always do, belatedly, that I have access to thousands of diehard readers, of all kinds of different readers, all kinds of different life experiences and ages and types of reading. Why not take advantage of that? Why, if we're going to break the normal parasocial relationship mold by me spending money on you instead of you spending money on me, where I'm mailing out stacks of books every week, if we're going to break the parasocial relationship mode in that direction, then why can't we break it all over the place? Other social influencers ask you what you think and absolutely do not care. If you came close to them and told them what you think, their bodyguards would kill you. I actually want to know. I have access to just ask. So tell me all about it. Are you entirely self-motivated on what you pick to read next? And if you aren't, what voices go into that mix? What pushes you towards a book, even if it's not what you're going to read just next? There's also the question of it going on your extended mental TBR or your actual physical TBR. Do outside forces help to put books on that list? And if so, what are they? Are they the same now as they were 10 years ago? Have they migrated a lot to BookTube? I would love to hear. I would love to hear all about it. How do you decide on your next book? Feel free to bombard me with answers. You can answer in the comments field. I leave my email on every video. You can email me all you like. I'd love to hear about it. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up because obviously I'm needed elsewhere. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.